All right. Hi, Sharada.
Hi, Radhika. Yeah, we're finally doing this.
Yeah, I guess we are. So, we are both excited about the Living Tamil LitFest that's going to be happening on April 3rd and 4th in New York City. And as we went over the website of the LitFest, we realized that we actually knew very little about many of our guest speakers. And so this series is a way for us to really get to know our guest speakers a little bit better and also to introduce them to a wider audience. And so today we're starting with Chad Post.
Mhm.
And before we start talking about Chad Post, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
What is your earliest memory of having read a book in translation, being aware that it was a translated work?
Yeah, translated works. I'm sure all of us read some translated works in high school or even middle school. I definitely did. I remember reading the French classics. Count of Monte Cristo comes to mind, but I definitely wasn't aware that it was a translation. I just thought of it as an English book. Anything West was English. And then 10 years later, in my 20s, I read 100 Years of Solitude, being very aware that it was a translation. Again, I don't remember paying attention to the fact that it's a translation at all.
Mhm,
It was just set in a foreign place.
mhm.
And then the first time I was super aware of reading a translated work, being very aware that it's a translation and doing research and picking the translator was Crime and Punishment. I remember talking to you about that.
Uh-huh,
Oliver Reddy's translation had just come out, and
uh-huh,
one was talking about it.
mhm. Yeah,
What was yours?
very similar. So I used to read and still do read a lot of Japanese mysteries and Scandinavian noir, and I've always thought of them as English works, just set in Japan or set in Norway or Iceland. But the first book that I read and I was fully aware that it was a work in translation was a book by Salma. It was actually a Tamil to English translation. It's called The Hour Past Midnight. I read this in 2013, and it really reopened my eyes to Tamil literature and introduced me to the world of translation in general. So that was a big eye opener for me. But we're talking about translation today because Chat Post and all the work he does directly relates
And
to
now you are a Tamil to English translator. You've done translations yourself. You've come a
aspiring
long way. Yeah.
translator. Yeah, aspiring translator. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. But anyway, Chad Post comes to mind when we talk about translations because he's a publisher, he's a critic, but really I think of him as an evangelist for world literature because he has spent about 20 years of his career just trying to increase visibility to international literature as translated in English. And if you know, he's done a lot of things. If you want to go with them really quickly, Chad Post is the founder of Open Letter Books, which is a non-profit press dedicated exclusively to translated literature. He also runs a blog, a literary Substack called 3%. He also has a podcast, which is not active anymore, also called 3%. Runs another Substack called the Dalkey, Mining the
Mining
Dalkey
the
Archive,
Dalkey
right?
archive.
Yeah, that's the one. And then he also founded the Best Translated Book Award for Fiction. He created the first ever literary translation database. And he also so he teaches classes on publishing and world literature at the University of Rochester. They have a program on literary translation, and he teaches some of those classes there. He was awarded the 2018 Words Without Borders Award for promoting international literature, and he also received the 2020 Joan Baptista Sendros Award for his contributions to Catalan literature. And we'll talk about one of the
Mhm.
Catalan authors that he has been working with later. And when talking about him, we are hearing the phrase 3% a lot, and we have to quickly talk about what that is. So, this is a statistic that Chad introduced and is now very well known in the publishing space. It refers to a problem that only 3% of uh, works published in the United States are actually works in translation.
Yep.
And that's a problem he's trying to fix. And yeah, we're going to talk about all of that later. So,
Yep.
yeah, what struck you about Chad, Sharda?
Wow. I I mean we've been researching Chad for the past couple of days, and
Yeah.
what an interesting story. Like
Mhm.
when you think of publishers like we think of like this rarefied New York City publishing world, and I imagine like Ivy League people. It seems so distant. But Chad Post, here's this person, this kid from Bay City, Michigan, like who had no other literary influence in his life, just through just pure love of reading brought him here, and now he is like this important voice, prominent voice in the literary world. And I'm just like his entire journey is so fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. In talking about his beginning, as you mentioned, it looks like he had this love for reading right from a very young age. He speaks about having that awareness even when he was 4 or 5 years old. I don't remember being aware of anything at 4 or 5. And as you mentioned again, he really does not seem to have had any literary influence from his own parents. His father was a golf equipment salesman. His mother was a math teacher, and he says that that this reading seems to have been his own thing. And he grew up and he learned Spanish in high school, learned Spanish in college, and he talks about reading Julio Cortázar and how he was sort of the gateway into the world of translation for him. I think the story that really was a turning point was Continuity of Parks, which I had not heard of until recently. And so his taste in books also seems to be, it seems to be more on the experimental, sort of strange side. He likes adventures writing that plays with form and plays with storytelling, and that's the kind of books that his open letters also publishes, right? So, what did you find out about his later years?
Yeah, yeah, that was a good introduction to his early years, Radhika. Like, yeah, he grows up in Bay City, Michigan, and this kid who just loves reading, and then discovers international literature, Spanish literature in college. Um, I think he went to Michigan State University, and then from there, it's just this journey is so fascinating. I always wondered who are these people who like make careers out of working in bookstores, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
in college, he discovers Spanish literature, and he is really drawn to this avant-garde experimental style of writing. And he decides that all he wants to do is work in bookstores. Yeah, we have to plug Harshaniyam, like the podcast that we love. Like I got a lot of this information from his interview
Yeah,
in
the chat.
Harshaniyam, like
Yeah,
Anil
that's right.
Sarvapalli, who runs Harshaniyam, he's an institution on his own. Like we someday we have to talk about him. Yeah, but I really recommend that podcast. Yeah, so he after college he goes on to work in a couple of bookstores, and in one of those bookstores, he's introduced to Dalkey Archive. And that is exactly the kind of publishing house like that's been publishing the books that he's attracted towards. So Dalkey Archive is this legendary publishing house. It's founded by John O'Brien, and they really specialize in this style of avant-garde um, experimental style of novels. So I learned this word Oulipian in the last couple of days. The Oulipian writers, the French, Oulipo is a French movement that was founded in 1960 by this group of writers who were writing this particular style of books. And Chad Post discovers this entire world while working in this bookstore. And then he moves on to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he works in another bookstore called Quail Ridge Books. And that's very interesting what he does there. So again, like he is this kid who loves book. He's just been ordering books from all over the world into these bookstores, and he finds that like these translated books are just scattered all over the bookstore, and they're just like people are just walking right past them. They're not drawing any attention, and he comes up with this idea of creating this separate section of putting all these translated books. There are very few of them together in one section and calling it separating them by region. I think Asian, like Latin American, and that seems to have quadrupled the sales of those
Right.
books.
Yeah.
And because of this effort, Quail Ridge Books wins the Best Bookstore Award from Publishers Weekly that year.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, he has been like making a difference and changing things right from that age, like from the very early years. And in these bookstores is where he discovers Dalkey Archive, and Dalkey Archive has been publishing this literary magazine called Context Magazine, and he finds an ad in Context Magazine for an apprenticeship with Dalkey Archive to go work with John O'Brien for a whole year and learn about everything publishing, and he's selected for that apprenticeship, and there starts his literary, I think his real impact. I think his years with John O'Brien are, to me, the most fascinating part of his story. Like I said, Dalkey Archive is this legendary publishing house, and they're like a powerhouse. They're very small, but very important, well regarded. And he starts
also
this
gets
apprenticeship.
hired. Yeah, he gets hired
Hired like
halfway through the
within a few months, he
apprenticeship.
becomes the
Right.
associate director of Dalkey Archive. And John O'Brien and Chad Post, they travel all over the world, like finding. They find that like lots of European governments, they have grants for getting their works translated, and they travel to all these different countries. And he says like all those trips resulted in at least 5 books each, and they've published some very important books. I think he talks about the first Estonian book published in
Right.
English.
Yeah, he does.
Each one of them, like all the books they brought out, were all important, and so that's I think from 2002 to 2006. And but John O'Brien, like Chad likes to talk about this, is famously a difficult person to work with, and Chad has a falling out with John O'Brien and decides to go his own way in I think 2008. And he at this point is when he really wants to bring attention to this 3% problem. So this 3% statistic came out in 2005, where what it means is that it says that only 3% of books published in English in America are translated works. And Chad Post is like really like flabbergasted. Like he finds that number appalling. It's he says he even calls it disgusting. Like it's not acceptable to him that there are only 3%. But it turns out the actual number is much smaller. But even the 3% is so low, and he wants to make a difference. And he starts this blog in the run up to his new venture, which you are going to talk about, right? Like his next step is open letter books. Yeah, we can talk about that.
But before that, Sharda, do you remember any books that he's known for bringing out during his Dalkey Archive years?
I tried looking up. I mean, I found a lot of Dalkey Archive books that are like super important, that mostly even I know about. I'm not that plugged into this world at all. But the one, but I couldn't find a list from their website, like a chronological list.
Right.
The Dalkey Archive is the Substack Chat Post has. I've been looking through it, and there was one post about this Estonian writer that was very interesting. So it's called Things in the Night by Marty Unt.
I see.
That post by itself was interesting. I'm sure he has a lot more of that in his Substack. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm sure a lot of I think European books is what I remember him saying. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Chad has had this falling out with John O'Brien, and then he starts the 3% blog, the website, and then he goes to the University of Rochester. The University of Rochester at this time is trying to set up a program in literary translation for graduate and undergraduate students. And as a sort of a practical component to this program, they're trying to introduce not children, but students to things like what goes into editing a book, what goes into publishing a book, sort of the business side of things to complement the theory of translation, right? And so they set up this open letter press, where students can work at the press, and the culmination of their program, really their thesis, will be a work in translation, a full-length work in translation. And that's how the open letter books really starts. And he publishes his first book in 2008. And that book was Nobody's Home by Croatian author Dubravka Ugresic. Yeah, I think it's Ugresic. That was released in September 2008. Dubravka Ugresic she passed away in 2023, but she's one of the best-known authors, very renowned author that Open Letter Books has published quite a few books of.
Do you know if that book came out of this program or was it one of the first books opened it?
It was just the first book. It was
It didn't come
Dubravka
out of this
was a
graduate
famous
program.
Croatian,
Okay.
yeah. So she was a famous Croatian author, and so they just happened to publish her book as their first book. And so the way Open Letter Books works is that they publish about 10 books every year. And going back to Chad's vision, really, and why he founded Open Letter Books, right? So it stems from his philosophy that uh, the US publishing industry is too domestically focused, that they don't really publish enough translation. Obviously, you have the 3% problem. But why is this a problem? So Chad says that when you don't have works in translation coming into the country, then the culture and really the thinking tends to become very insular, very provincial, closed off, and it almost like self-gratifying. You're stuck in a loop where everything becomes codified and you're writing similar things, right? And this is a problem. And he also says that reading books in translation makes you a better person because it's harder to go to war with somebody that you feel like you know or connect with at some level. And that's his theory behind why translation matters, right? And I thought this was really one of the most interesting things about what Chad has to say about all of this. And so Open Letter Books focuses mostly on novels and short fiction, although it also publishes works of non-fiction, like Nobody's Home, for example, by Dubravka. Ugresic is a collection of essays. It's not fiction. But they also publish other works by her, works of fiction. And they work really closely with translators, and they often publish works that are unknown to English readers. And as I looked over the catalog of Open Letter Books, I mean, and not one book. I mean, I couldn't really think of even one book that I had heard of, much less read. But there's a certain
Yeah, that
kind
is a
of
problem we'll talk
it
about,
is,
right? Like we'll
yeah,
talk about that later. Yeah.
yeah. And so there's a certain kind of book that's an open letter book, right? And if you can clearly see it if you look
Yeah.
at the books in more detail. So like of course, like knowing Chad and his tastes in books, the books are unconventional. They are kind of structurally strange. They're artistically daring, and if something that would have an obvious commercial value is likely not going to be an open letter book, right? And also, if something is going to be obviously about something political or it has a socially motivated writing, is again probably not going to be an open letter book. So those are the kind of books that he has published over the years. I tried to find a count, but I couldn't, so I actually went and counted all of the books, and it looks like they published about 187 books so far since their founding in 2008. And
That
so
is a big number. Yeah.
that is a big number. And looks like he has done some work in changing that statistic right there, like the 3% statistic. So some of the notable authors that he has published include Dubravka Ugresic, who we spoke about. And then we have Mercè Rodoreda. Mercè Rodoreda, yeah. So
The Catalan.
yeah, she's
The
the Catalan
Catalan writer.
writer, and I
Yeah.
guess that's part of the reason why he won that award for publicizing or bringing more attention to Catalan literature. And her work called Death in Spring is Open Letter's second best-selling book ever, Death in Spring. And then there is Rodrigo Fresa, who's an Argentine writer. And then we have Can Shue, Xue. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, but I've heard of her, and she writes in Chinese, and some of her books include Vertical Motion and Frontier. So these are some of the significant writers that Open Letter has published.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to talk about the style of books, right? Like they publish it comes from his personal taste mostly, and I mean that's how he got into Dalkey Archive,
right,
like Dalkey, and they
yeah,
have the same aesthetic. I think it's like the Dalkey aesthetic.
right.
He's very, very attracted to like structural innovation and like kind of experimental. And he even says that if a book is written like a movie, he's not drawn to it at all. Like it cannot be
Right.
realistic. Yeah, that's the kind of book he's really drawn to. That was
Yeah,
very interesting to me.
it
Yeah.
was. And even when you look at the website of the Open Letter Books, and you see their all of the books they've come out with, what struck me was the covers of the books. I
Yes,
mean, yeah, they are so attractive, so very
so
attractive.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
and
really catch your eye. You cannot miss them in a bookstore.
they do, and they're
Very.
very different from each other. They don't look
Uh-huh.
alike at all. Like each one is like a distinct work of art, actually. So
Yeah,
that's and I think he also speaks about how it matters to him that the cover is very
is
attractive, right?
important, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And like he talks about how his mom is a math teacher.
Hmm.
And he talks about like he was very good at math growing up, but he didn't want to make a career out of it, but he was pretty good at it. And he seems to be like a numbers person, right? He's into statistics. He wants to like we'll talk about. I mean, it's probably a good time to talk about the translation database too. Yeah, but he is really like about numbers. Like he wants to do them, and I feel like that has something to do with his taste in literature too. Like something about like a puzzle. Like he approaches the book like a puzzle. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Want to talk about the translation database?
Yeah. That's so that's something he came up with as a way to address the 3% problem, right? The only way to know if you're solving a problem is if you can track it. So
Mhm.
so he started tracking every book in translation, of translation that came out in the US, and I think it's been active since 2007 or 2006. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
I
when.
read that it's been acquired. I don't know if that's the right word by
It has
Publishers Weekly.
Publishers
Publishers
Weekly.
Weekly has
That's
it
right.
now. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And so I think he kept adding, and the point was to see if he was able to make a difference to the problem. And I think he did find that he was able to make a small difference, right?
Mhm.
In trying to track
Yeah.
the numbers.
One thing we weren't able to find Jayamohan's stories of the true in it, right?
Yeah,
I
we
don't
were
know if
not.
it's been updated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it looks like it's hasn't been updated for some time at least.
Uh-huh.
Hopefully it will. Um, and yeah, so he starts the translation database, and then we also spoke about the classes that he teaches
Yeah, we
at
spoke about the
Rochester
course.
University. And do you want to talk about what happened with him and John O'Brien? Looks like they made up.
Oh yeah, yeah. Before that, like there were two other things that he did, and he's still doing. One of them he's still doing. One is the Best Translated Book Award that
Uh-huh.
Open
That's
Letter
right.
was giving out. I think
Hmm.
that was from 2008 to 2020.
Hmm.
Uh, the Open Letter was giving out the Best Translated Book Award every
I
year.
see. I see.
Looks like that's been stopped for a few years
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
I found that a lot of interesting titles on that list too, and I heard the names of so many small publishers that I hadn't heard of from the list of those books.
I
And
see.
the other prize that's currently active is Armory Square Prize. So
Right.
that was established in 2022, and
Hmm.
that's exclusively focusing on South Asian literature.
Right.
So Chat Post talks about how that's an area that they are lacking, like they don't have that many books from that region, and they want to encourage new translators from that region.
Hmm.
And so I think this is the fourth year for that book,
I see.
for that prize. Yes. And yes, and the falling out, yeah. So around I think 2019, um, Chad Post reaches out to John O'Brien again after a really long time of not having any contact at all,
Hmm.
and they reconcile. And but unfortunately, very soon after that, John O'Brien passes away,
Hmm.
um, and he leaves Dalkey Archive Press the entire catalog with Chad Post. So right now, Chad Post is heading both Dalkey Archive Press and Open Letter Books. And that's where the mining the Dalkey Archive Substack
Hmm.
comes from. He's been
Right.
going through the archive and
Hmm.
writing about all those books, and I think they're republishing some of those too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, and looks like we covered
Co-
his career
We
in quite
covered his
some.
career,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, in talking about translation in general, right? So I think Chad mentions that there are two problems that he notices with translation. One is funding, which you will talk about, and the other is just readership.
Hmm.
Uh, what did you
Yep.
find out about the state of funding for
Yeah,
translation?
they're quite connected. So yeah, Chapos, like he's written extensively and spoken about this problem of funding in for literary translation, which seems to be even worse off than general publishing.
Hmm.
But even publishing in general, like the and non-profit publishing in particular, they rely on grants and mostly grants and donations from individual donors and philanthropists, that sort of stuff. But even these grants, they only address the supply side, right? Like if a country is funding translation for its work, they pay for the translator, but then how do you get it to the reader? Like it still needs to make it to a person who wants to read the book. That is
Right.
another problem. So is there not an audience for us? I don't think that's true. We, like you and I, we haven't heard about these books.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, like that. So that demand problem, like how do you solve that? That is also there. Um, yeah. So he has some ideas about how that can be addressed too, right?
Mhm. And in terms of readership, well, the readership for literature itself is quite small, and I think that there seems to be this division in many people's minds as we have readers of literature and then we have readers of translated literature, and Chat talks about how this division is not helpful at all,
Mhm.
and it just we just need to appeal to readers of literature in general, and one way that such works can get out there is through social media. You have Book Talk and Bookstagram and BookTube, and we often see that when a popular a booktuber talks about a book, it has a lot of reach, and so as readers, perhaps we could engage with the book more than just reading the book. And if you put the word out there, there might be other people who pick up the book after we do.
Mhm.
Um, did you? I think we spoke about this. That I was really surprised to find that The Vegetarian was a book that Chad rejected, uh, and well, he doesn't seem to regret the choice that he made. But yeah, then The Vegetarian went on to win some really big awards, right?
Yeah, I heard that too. Yeah, but you know what? That's what happens, right? Like if you're an indie publisher,
You have
he
many
publishes
choices.
what he likes. He has a very particular
Exactly.
taste. Yeah, he's going to
Yeah.
publish books that he can vouch for. Yeah,
Mhm. So
and
when you went through the catalog, was there a book that struck you and you feel like you want to add that to your list to read at some point?
yeah, there are so many of them. Like, oh, I think I need to. So the nonfiction book. There were two nonfiction books that attracted me. One was about Chernobyl, I
Uh-huh.
think, right?
Was it about Chernobyl? That was in, I think, a
That was
Dalkia
an old
archive.
Dalkey archive book,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think. Yeah,
yeah,
that I
voice.
thought was interesting. And the other, that might have been fiction too, I don't know. The I'm talking about, I think, the Orville book. So the Orville
Yes.
book, I forgot, I
Uh-huh.
don't have the name right here,
Yeah,
but it's on openletters.org. I
right.
think it's an upcoming book. It's written by a Polish writer and
Mm-hmm,
translated into English. She travels to Oroville and writes about this unique phenomenon, Oroville,
mm-hmm,
the small town,
mm-hmm,
utopia in India.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That was interesting. And the other book, actually, I borrowed that book. I do have it. I don't have it right now, but I did borrow it from the library. He talks about his bestseller. I think her name is Elisa something. What's her name?
We're
He's a
talking
part
about,
Korean Swiss writer.
is it Winter in Sokcho?
Winter and Sokcho.
Okay,
Elisa
okay.
Shua Dusapin.
All right, I
She's a
see. Yeah.
part Korean Swiss writer,
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh,
this
uh-huh,
story is set in Korea. And
uh-huh.
again, like I found this entire thing interesting too. So she is part Korean, living in Switzerland. And
Mm-hmm.
another thing I found out was Chad Post is married to a second generation Latvian American
Mm-hmm.
who was actually part of that graduate program that they have, and she's a translator. She's
Is
a
she also part of Open Letter Press? I think she's one
Yes,
of
she
the
was, but now
editors,
she's
right?
with Coffee House Press. She recently moved to
Oh,
Coffee House Press.
I see.
And again, her story was interesting too. Like all these second generation writers discovering their roots and wanting to translate. And that's not that different from what we are trying to do in our group,
Right,
right?
right.
Our
Yeah.
children, what they're trying to do, right? Like I found that
Mhm.
interesting too. I mean, same with Elisa. She looks like she's drawn to her Korean roots, and
Mhm.
this book is set in Korea. I borrowed that, and the cover looked so pretty.
It does. Yeah.
I
I
want
think
to read
it's
it.
one of the books that did really well on Instagram,
Yes.
or because the cover was so
Oh,
attractive. Right.
yeah. I hadn't
Yeah.
heard about that until
Uh-huh.
I'm not plugged into this book talk,
Mhm.
bookstagram world. Yeah. What else did we want to talk about? Yeah.
Um, I also found one of our other guest speakers, Esther Allen, also on one listed as one of the translators on Chad's website.
Oh, she's a translator too. I
yeah,
heard, like, she was, I think, like an important figure in the Penn World Voices
yes,
Festival.
right. Yeah. So who are we going to talk about next, Sharda?
We'll have to look. We'll have to
Yeah.
look. Yeah, I think Chad Poster was a great first guest,
Mhm.
not guest, pick for us.
Yeah, right.
I'm really glad we picked him. I found him so fascinating. I wanted to share this quote that from an article in Vulture. That was the
Mhm.
first thing that I read about Chad Post. When I saw the name Chad Post, I googled and I read the first article, and it was this Vulture article where he talks about the 3% problem.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it seems obvious in hindsight, but he put it so beautifully that it
Mhm.
really struck me. This quote from that
Mhm.
article. Okay, I'm just going to read it. We are all aware of the danger of filter bubbles, but less actively conscious of a linguistic barrier that locks us out of global culture at the highest levels. Goethe is quoted as saying, left to itself, every literature will exhaust its vitality if it is not refreshed by the interest and contributions of a foreign one. Although American fiction is neither bad nor withering, there is a lurking suspicion among a lot of writers, readers, and professors that without international literature, we end up writing the same things in the same ways over and over again. Even worse is the effect of cultural isolation on our politics. I mean,
Yeah,
it feels so relevant today.
that's
But I
right.
really loved how he put that, like writing the same things in
Same
the same
things in the
ways
same
over
ways
and
over
over
and over
again.
again.
It applies
That's
for
right.
all cultures. Like
Yeah.
once it's so insular, it becomes stagnant and
Stagnant.
uninteresting
Mm-hmm.
without outside influence.
Yeah.
He put it there so beautifully, and yeah, and he's working towards changing that. And I'm glad we got to know about him.
Yeah. On that hopeful note, perhaps we should end this.
Yep, we'll put all the information that we have in the show notes.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. Nice chatting
Okay.
with you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye bye.